Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. Walter Isaacson, acclaimed biographer of genius, presents the definitive portrait of a revolutionary who shaped our digital world. Steve Jobs is the unvarnished story of the mercurial Apple co-founder, based on countless interviews with Jobs himself, his family, friends, and adversaries. This book explores the profound connection between Jobs' ferocious drive, his unconventional personality, and his world-changing creativity. It reveals how his passion for perfection, his obsession with design, and his belief in the intersection of humanities and technology led to products that redefined entire industries. Isaacson captures the essence of a complex visionary, his brilliance, his demons, and his ultimate legacy, offering an unparalleled look at the man who dared to think different. Introduction: How this book came to be. This biography exists because Steve Jobs himself willed it into being. In the summer of 2004, during a walk through the hills near his home, he turned to me, Walter Isaacson, and said, "I think I'd like you to write my biography." What followed was a unique and extraordinary arrangement. He made a promise of complete authenticity, insisting the book be an unvarnished account of his life, with no control over the content, and a vow not to even read it before publication. Our conversations were candid, though some of the most sensitive were kept off the record until after his death. His motivation was deeply personal. He explained, "I wanted my kids to know me. I wasn't always there for them, and I wanted them to know why and to understand what I did." He wanted to leave a truthful legacy. 1. Childhood, abandoned and chosen. Steve Jobs was formed by two powerful, conflicting narratives from his earliest days. His adoption by Paul and Clara Jobs was framed not as a simple necessity, but as a deliberate act of selection. His parents repeatedly told him he was special and chosen, instilling a powerful sense of being an exception, destined for something important. Simultaneously, the knowledge that he was given up by his birth parents imprinted a profound sense of abandonment, a feeling of being an outsider that would later fuel a relentless drive to control his own world. His father, Paul, a machinist and hobbyist, introduced him to the intricacies of electronics in their garage, patiently teaching him the fundamentals of design and instilling a belief that the craftsmanship of even the hidden parts of a product mattered. This potential was unlocked in the 4th grade by a remarkable teacher, Imogen Hill, who saw his intelligence and used bribes of candy and cash to motivate him, sparking a voracious intellectual curiosity. Even then, the early contours of his powerful will and charismatic persuasion were visible as he began to learn he could will situations into being what he wanted them to be. 2. Strange pair, two Steves. The partnership that would birth Apple began with the unlikely friendship between two very different Steves at Homestead High School. Steve Wozniak was a pure, gentle engineering savant, a few years older, who designed complex electronics for the sheer joy of it, with no thought of profit. Steve Jobs, the intense and perceptive student, immediately recognized a kindred spirit and a source of incredible technical talent. Their first business venture was an illicit one, building and selling blue boxes, electronic devices that could hack the phone system to make free long-distance calls. Wozniak was the brilliant engineer who designed the elegant circuit board. Jobs, with his innate understanding of marketing and persuasion, took charge of sourcing parts, funding the operation, and masterminding the sales, even negotiating a deal for parts after pretending to be a representative from a fictitious company. It was a perfect symbiosis. Woz needed Jobs to turn his wizardry into products, and Jobs needed Woz to give his vision a tangible, technological form. For Jobs, the Blue Box was a formative, mind-blowing experience. It taught him the intoxicating power of a small, smart team to outwit a giant established system. a lesson he would carry forward to his ultimate challenge. 3. The Dropout. Turn on, tune in. Steve Jobs' time at Reed College was a period of intense personal and philosophical exploration that would deeply shape his future. Feeling he was financially draining his parents without purpose, he made the radical decision to drop out after just one semester. However, he did not leave the campus. Instead, he invented his own curriculum, becoming a drop-in who audited classes that genuinely captivated him, freed from the structure of required courses. The most famous of these was a calligraphy class, where he learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, variable font widths, and the artistry of beautiful typography. At the time, it seemed like a purely aesthetic pursuit with no practical application. Yet, a decade later, this knowledge became fundamental to the Macintosh, which featured an unprecedented variety of beautiful, proportionally spaced fonts. This experience established his belief in connecting seemingly unrelated dots in one's life. Beyond the classroom, he embraced a counterculture lifestyle, surviving on free meals from the local Hare Krishna temple and experimenting with substance, profoundly opening his mind to different levels of consciousness. It was during this period that he absorbed the ethos of the Whole Earth catalog, internalizing its imperative to stay hungry, stay foolish, a mantra that would become his lifelong creed. 4. Atari and India, Zen and the Art of Game Design. Jobs' entry into the professional world was a testament to his audacity. He walked into the Atari lobby, not as a polished job applicant, but as a countercultural figure, unkempt, long-haired, and deliberately barefoot, a style that flouted corporate norms. His approach was not one of polite inquiry, but of sheer, unwavering will. He issued an ultimatum to the personnel manager, a statement that was less a request and more a declaration of fact. I'm not leaving until you hire me. Chief Engineer Al Alcorn, intrigued by his raw energy and intelligence, hired him. At Atari, his technical skills were recognized, but his abrasive personality clashed with other engineers. It was there that he received a pivotal assignment from Nolan Bushnell to design the circuit board for the Breakout game, with a bonus for minimizing the number of chips used. Jobs, in a move that foreshadowed his future role, turned to Steve Wozniak, the superior engineer, to execute the complex design. Wozniak performed a brilliant feat of engineering, working 4 straight nights to create an incredibly chip-efficient design. However, Jobs misrepresented the bonus to Wozniak, keeping the majority for himself, an act of ruthless pragmatism that would characterize some of his future business dealings. With the money from this project, he funded a spiritual quest to India with his friend Dan Kotke, seeking enlightenment. The journey was arduous. They arrived to find their intended guru had died. Despite this, the experience, the poverty, the spirituality, the contrast, deeply affected him. He returned thinner, with a shaved head, and more intensely focused. This exposure to Eastern philosophy cemented his core aesthetic principles: minimalist simplicity, the elimination of clutter, and an almost fanatical level of focus. 5. The Apple I. Turn on, tune in, boot up. There, Steve Wozniak, driven by pure engineering passion, was inspired to design a single, elegant circuit board that integrated a microprocessor, a keyboard, and a connection to a television screen. It was a masterpiece of minimalist design, created for the joy of it. Steve Jobs, however, looked at Wozniak's hobbyist board and saw something entirely different, a finished product. He insisted they could build and sell these pre-assembled boards. To fund this venture, Jobs sold his only valuable possession, his Volkswagen bus, and Wozniak reluctantly sold his prized HP 65 calculator, raising the seed capital to produce their first batch. They formalized their partnership with a simple handshake. Jobs then chose the name Apple, feeling the name was fun, spirited, and not intimidating. Their breakthrough came when Paul Terrell, owner of the pioneering Byte shop, saw their demonstration and placed an order for 50 fully assembled computers. This single order transformed their garage-based hobby into a real business, forcing them to source parts, build inventory, and fulfill an order that would launch a revolution. 6. The Apple II, dawn of a new age. The Apple II represented the full flowering of the Wozniak-Jobs partnership, transforming the personal computer from a hobbyist project into a consumer appliance. Steve Wozniak engineered a masterpiece, creating a machine with color graphics, sound, and expansion slots in an architecture of stunning elegance. Steve Jobs provided the overarching vision, insisting the machine be a complete, polished product. He demanded a molded plastic case and, in a critical obsession, required it to be silent. This led to the recruitment of Rod Holt, who designed a revolutionary switching power supply that eliminated the need for a noisy fan. The venture was professionalized by Mike Markkula, a retired Intel millionaire who provided crucial funding, wrote the foundational business plan, and instilled a marketing philosophy based on empathy and imputed value. Jobs, understanding the power of branding, forced a reluctant relationship with a premier ad agency and personally oversaw the creation of the iconic, rainbow-striped Apple logo. The Apple II wasn't merely a product, it was the culmination of Wozniak's technical genius, Jobs' demanding aesthetics, Markkula's business acumen, and world-class marketing, launching both a company and an industry. 7. Chris and Lisa, he who is abandoned. Steve Jobs' relationship with his daughter, Lisa Brennan Jobs, began with his tumultuous relationship with his high school girlfriend, the artist Kristen Brennan. When Kristen became pregnant, Jobs denied paternity with a vehemence that caused immense personal anguish. He refused to accept responsibility, both emotionally and financially, for the first 2 years of Lisa's life, despite overwhelming circumstantial evidence. This denial culminated in a court-ordered paternity test, which scientifically confirmed he was the father, forcing him to begin paying child support. In an act of profound complexity, he later named a groundbreaking new Apple computer the Lisa. Publicly, he insisted it was an acronym for Local Integrated Software Architecture, but to those who knew the intimate details of his life, it was a private, if conflicted, acknowledgement. His relationship with Lisa would remain complex and evolve slowly over many years, marked by the same patterns of intense focus and painful neglect that characterized other areas of his life. 8. Xerox and Lisa, graphical user interfaces. The trajectory of personal computing was permanently altered by a single demonstration. Apple made a strategic deal to invest $1 million in Xerox, with a crucial condition. Apple engineers would be shown the secret technologies at Xerox PARC. There, Steve Jobs saw the Xerox Alto and experienced its graphical user interface, complete with a mouse, bitmap display, and windows. He immediately recognized it as the future, exclaiming, "Why aren't you doing anything with this? This is the greatest thing. This is revolutionary." He was astounded that Xerox's management failed to grasp the commercial potential of their own invention. Apple adopted the concept, believing they would perfect what Xerox had merely invented. He poured this vision into the Apple Lisa project, aiming to create a revolutionary business computer. However, his volatile management style led to his removal from the Lisa team by Mike Markkula and other executives, a deep professional and personal betrayal that enraged him. This event solidified his growing pirates versus the Navy mentality, where he saw his small, dedicated band as rebellious innovators and the rest of Apple as a slow, bureaucratic navy. 9. Going public, a man of wealth and fame. Apple's initial public offering in December 1980 was a seismic event in business history, instantly creating hundreds of millionaires. Steve Jobs, at 25, saw his own stake balloon to $256 million. His reaction to this staggering wealth was characteristically paradoxical. He expressed a profound lack of interest in material accumulation, maintaining a relatively Spartan personal life. This non-materialistic stance, however, was paired with a firm, sometimes harsh, control over his money. This was exemplified in his refusal to give financial aid to Annie Fry, a former girlfriend and early Apple employee who was struggling financially. For Jobs, the immense fortune was never the objective. It was merely an incidental byproduct of his core philosophy, a relentless focus on the work itself. The IPO also transformed him into a national celebrity and a corporate icon. 10. The Mac is born. You say you want a revolution. After being ousted from the Lisa team, Steve Jobs channeled his energy into the smaller Macintosh project, transforming it into his personal crusade. He assembled a small, elite pirates team, sequestering them in a separate building under a pirate flag to foster a rebellious, us-against-the-world spirit. He staffed this team not just with engineers, but with artists and poets who could think creatively. To motivate them to achieve what seemed impossible, he used his powerful reality distortion field, a potent mix of charismatic vision, persuasive rhetoric, and outright lies that convinced people they could surpass their limits. He instilled a profound sense of ownership and artistry by having every team member sign their names on the inside mold of the Macintosh case, making them literal creators of the product. Through it all, his driving philosophy was the demand that every aspect of the Mac be insanely great, a mantra that pushed his team to relentless perfectionism and culminated in a product that truly aimed to change the world. 11. The reality distortion field, playing by his own rules. The reality distortion field was a powerful concoction of charisma, bravado, persistence, and a hypnotic ability to ignore or outright deny facts, obstacles, or conventional wisdom. Jobs used it to convince the original Mac team they could build a computer in an impossibly short time frame. Those under its influence would find themselves committed to achieving what they knew was impossible. The after effect was a common, dawning realization. It was impossible, but we did it. This ability was a double-edged sword. It could inspire small teams to achieve engineering and design miracles, pushing them beyond their perceived limits. However, it also caused burnout, frustration, and could lead to ethical compromises, as the line between visionary persuasion and manipulative delusion was often blurred. 12. The design. Real artists simplify. Jobs' design philosophy was not a superficial preference, but a deep, almost spiritual belief that real artists simplify. This core principle was shaped by several key influences. From his father, Paul Jobs, he learned that the craftsmanship of even the hidden, unseen parts of a fence or a product was a matter of integrity. This obsession with simplicity led to intense battles, such as his push to remove the on-off switch from the Macintosh to create a perfectly clean facade, a fight he ultimately lost, but which illustrated his extreme commitment. He instilled this value in his team by having them sign the inside of the Mac case, making them artists, not just engineers. His fanatical attention to detail was legendary. In one formative anecdote, he rejected a proposed design for the Apple II logic board because he found a single, internal screw to be too expensive and aesthetically unpleasing, forcing a complete and costly redesign. He pursued a deep simplicity, where immense engineering complexity was harnessed to create a product that was intuitively simple and beautiful for the user, believing this was the highest form of art. 13. Building the Mac. The journey is the reward. The final push to build the Macintosh was an all-consuming, brutal endeavor driven by Steve Jobs' relentless will. The journey is the reward. This was the mantra Jobs imposed on the team, engraving it on plaques. This philosophy emphasized the heroic process of creation over the final product, even as the team endured 90-hour work weeks under excruciating pressure to meet the announced January 1984 ship date. The project was nearly derailed by a severe software crisis, with the operating system plagued by bugs and missing features. This culminated in a specific panic when a critical software simulator was lost, requiring a frantic, multi-day rescue effort to reconstruct it from backups. Jobs managed this high-stress environment through a mix of motivational tactics, alternating between inspiring his team to see themselves as pioneers on a historic mission and intimidating them with his infamous temper and perfectionism. 14. Enter Scully, the Pepsi Challenge. Steve Jobs' search for a new CEO for Apple culminated in one of the most famous recruitment pitches in corporate history. He set his sights on John Scully, the polished and successful president of Pepsi-Cola. Jobs conducted an intense, months-long courtship, but Scully, comfortable in his established career, was deeply reluctant to leap into the volatile world of personal computers. The turning point came during a tense walk on a New York City rooftop. Jobs delivered his legendary challenge. Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water, or do you want a chance to change the world? The line struck Scully with the force of a personal revelation, making his corporate career at Pepsi seem trivial in comparison. Beyond the pitch, the two men had formed a powerful personal bond, connecting over a shared appreciation for design and big ideas. Jobs saw Scully as a soulmate and the father figure he craved. With Mike Markula eager to step down as CEO, the path was clear. Scully ultimately accepted, a decision that fulfilled Jobs' immediate desire but would soon set the stage for an epic and tragic corporate clash. 15. The launch, a dent in the universe. The launch of the Macintosh on January 24, 1984, was a masterfully orchestrated event, designed not just to introduce a product, but to announce a revolution. Days earlier, the 1984 commercial had aired during the Super Bowl, creating a cultural firestorm and framing Apple as the rebel against a monolithic establishment. This was the physical manifestation of Jobs' driving ambition to make a dent in the universe. The press hailed the Mac as a profound breakthrough, a true personal computer. Jobs often framed this achievement with his bicycle for the mind analogy, describing computers as tools that amplified human intellectual capability, just as the bicycle amplified physical locomotion. The launch of validation of his insanely great philosophy. However, this honeymoon period was short-lived. After strong initial sales, demand sharply declined. The Mac's high price, small memory, lack of a hard drive, and initial scarcity of software became significant barriers to mass adoption, revealing the harsh commercial realities that followed the brilliant spectacle. 16. Gates and Jobs, when orbits cross. The complex, decades-long relationship between Steve Jobs and Bill Gates was defined by a fundamental clash over the origin of ideas. Initially, Microsoft was a key software partner for Apple, developing products for the Apple II and the nascent Macintosh. The relationship shattered when Jobs saw an early demonstration of Microsoft Windows. He was enraged, summoning Gates to Apple headquarters and accusing him of blatantly stealing the graphical user interface that Apple had pioneered. Gates famously countered with a cool, logical retort that has defined the dispute ever since. He said, "I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV set and found out you had already stolen it." For Jobs, the conflict was not merely legal. It was deeply personal and aesthetic. He held Gates in contempt for what he perceived as a fundamental lack of taste. Jobs justified Apple's own appropriation from Xerox with Picasso's maxim, "Good artists copy, great artists steal," believing Apple had transformed the idea into art, while Microsoft had merely copied it. 17. Icarus. What goes up? As the Macintosh sales quickly fell, creating a financial crisis at Apple. This crisis ignited a brutal power struggle between Steve Jobs and the CEO he had personally recruited, John Sculley. Their fundamental disagreement centered on the Mac's identity. Jobs saw it as a premium, insanely great product for creatives, a revolutionary toy, while Sculley argued it needed to become a practical, affordable appliance for the mass market. As Apple's financial situation worsened, Sculley and the board made pragmatic decisions, such as discontinuing the failed Lisa line. Jobs viewed this as a betrayal of the company's founding vision. He saw Sculley as a traitor and began secretly plotting a boardroom coup to oust him. However, Sculley got wind of the plan and confronted Jobs directly in a tense meeting, stating, "You've let me down. I've lost my confidence in you." The Apple board of directors sided with Sculley, voting to strip Jobs of all operational authority and managerial duties, effectively exiling the company's visionary co-founder from the product creation he lived for. 18. Next, Prometheus Unbound. Following his painful ouster from Apple, Steve Jobs channeled his energy into founding Next, a company intended to vindicate his vision. In a symbolic act, he sold all but one of his Apple shares. His vision for Next was grandiose: to build the ultimate interpersonal workstation for the higher education market. Using his undiminished charisma, he recruited a brilliant A-team of engineers and designers, many poached from Apple. The venture attracted significant investment, notably from billionaire Ross Perot, who was captivated by a TV documentary about Jobs and invested $20 million, and later a $100 million investment from Canon. However, Jobs' perfectionism and insistence on total control led to critical flaws. His decisions, while embodying his insanely great philosophy, resulted in a product that was overpriced, late to market, and ultimately a commercial failure in the hardware arena, though its sophisticated software would later prove foundational. 19. Pixar. Technology meets art. Jobs acquired the computer graphics division from George Lucas in 1986 for $10 million, marking the beginning of Pixar. His initial vision was commercial: to sell high-end Pixar image computers to animators and professionals in scientific and medical fields, believing he was creating a company where technology met art. Instead, Pixar became a massive financial drain, requiring Jobs to invest over $50 million of his personal fortune to keep it afloat as the hardware business floundered. The company's salvation came from an unexpected source: animator John Lasseter, who began creating groundbreaking short films like Luxo Jr. and the Oscar-winning Tin Toy. These films were not just technical demos. They were emotionally resonant stories that showcased the true artistic potential of computer animation. Simultaneously, Pixar developed its revolutionary RenderMan software, which became an industry standard. 20. A regular guy. Love is just a four-letter word. Jobs considered Tina Retz, an artistic and spiritual woman, his true soulmate, and repeatedly proposed to her. However, Retz consistently refused, deeply apprehensive of his mercurial and often cruel temperament. She described a fundamental part of him as an unopenable door, a core of his being that was permanently inaccessible, which prevented her from fully committing. Following this, he began a relationship with folk singer Joan Baez, a connection facilitated in part by their mutual admiration for Bob Dylan and Baez's own past relationship with him. During this period, despite his public fame and success, Jobs projected an image of trying to be a regular guy, while privately grappling with a deep sense of loneliness and an inability to sustain the intimate partnership he seemingly desired. These relationships highlighted the profound contrast between his world-changing professional confidence and his deeply vulnerable personal life. 21. The Family Man, at home with the Jobs clan. Despite his immense wealth and global fame, Steve Jobs cultivated a surprisingly grounded family life with his wife, Laurene Powell, whom he met at Stanford Business School in 1989. They lived in a modest, unostentatious brick house in Palo Alto, reflecting his disdain for showy displays of wealth. His parenting style mirrored his management approach. Intensely passionate but often inconsistent, fluctuating between deep, focused engagement and prolonged absences due to his all-consuming work. He applied his perfectionism to his children's development, pushing them to reject the merely good and strive for better. He insisted on having no large fence around their property, desiring an open connection to the neighborhood. While he believed in technology, he also understood its limitations, enforcing tech-free dinners and valuing face-to-face interaction. Throughout this domestic life, Laurene served as a crucial stabilizing force, a grounded, intelligent, and strong partner who managed the household, provided emotional ballast, and created a sanctuary from the storms of his professional life. 22. Toy Story, Buzz and Woody to the rescue. Pixar's journey to creating Toy Story was a saga of near failure and creative salvation. By the early 1990s, the company was bleeding money, and Steve Jobs repeatedly considered selling it. Survival hinged on a partnership with Disney to produce the first-ever full-length computer-animated film. However, the collaboration was fraught with creative clashes. Jobs fought Disney's corporate interference, shielding the creative team of John Lasseter and Ed Catmull and buying them time for a crucial rewrite. The team brilliantly reworked the script, transforming Woody into a flawed but ultimately heroic character and perfecting the dynamic with Buzz Lightyear. The result was a historic triumph. The November 1995 premiere was a cultural event that launched a new era in animation. The film's massive success was immediately followed by a blockbuster Pixar IPO, which turned Jobs' long-patient investment into a billion-dollar fortune, finally yielding the monumental success he had long sought outside of Apple. 23. The Second Coming, What Rough Beast. By 1996, Apple was in a state of catastrophic decline, hemorrhaging over $1 billion and standing perhaps 90 days from insolvency. Its core problem was the lack of a modern operating system. After failed negotiations to acquire B Incorporated, the company made a momentous decision. It would acquire Next for $429 million. While the official rationale was to obtain the sophisticated Next Step operating system, the unspoken consequence was the return of Steve Jobs. He initially rejoined as an informal advisor to the faltering CEO Gil Amelio, but quickly began asserting control. With characteristic cunning, he insisted on the title interim CEO, giving him absolute authority while maintaining the freedom of having no long-term commitment. 24. The Restoration, The Loser Now. Since his return to the Bleeding Apple, Jobs acted with surgical ruthlessness to stop the hemorrhage. He famously described the company's situation as a burning platform, where the only choice was to leap into the icy waters of radical change to survive. His first act was to streamline the chaotic product line, canceling about 70% of all projects, including the Newton Message Pad and the entire Mac clone program, which he saw as diluting the brand. He declared that Apple would focus only on making 4 great computers. This required the discipline to just say no to countless other ideas. He immediately ended the clone licensing, stopping what he called bad profits that cannibalized Apple's core business. Concurrently, he began enforcing his A-players philosophy, relentlessly weeding out employees he deemed less than exceptional to build lean, elite teams. In a stunning move was making a truce with the arch-nemesis, Microsoft. At the 1997 Macworld Expo, he announced a $150 million investment from Bill Gates' company, along with a patent settlement, a move that shocked the audience but stabilized Apple's immediate future. 25. Think different. Jobs as an interim CEO. With Apple's product line being ruthlessly streamlined, Steve Jobs turned to the vital task of restoring its soul. He greenlit the Think Different campaign, which would become one of the most iconic in advertising history. He immediately presented it to Apple's employees in an emotional speech, framing it not as a mere advertisement, but as a declaration of Apple's core identity and a reminder of its true soul. This campaign was a cornerstone of his philosophy that marketing should be about values, not features. During this period, he also insisted on the unconventional title of interim CEO, a reflection of his initial reluctance and his unique, almost provisional, approach to leading the company he had returned to save. The Think Different campaign successfully re-established an emotional connection with disillusioned customers and reinvigorated the company's own sense of purpose. 26. Design Principles. The studio of Jobs and Ive. The heart of Apple's creative rebirth was the design studio, a locked sanctuary where Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive formed a deep collaboration, a mind melt. They spent hours together, surrounded by prototypes, guided by a core philosophy. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. They cultivated a design in California ethos, giving products a human, cultural identity distinct from impersonal competitors. This process often demanded technological innovation, like creating a custom machine to produce the iMac seamless case. In this studio, design was the company's soul, and products became meticulously crafted objects of desire. 27. The iMac. Hello again. The iMac was not just a new computer. It was the physical proof of Steve Jobs' restored vision for Apple and its triumphant return to relevance. An all-in-one design in translucent Bondi blue was a revolution that shattered the monotonous beige of the personal computer market. It was a statement that technology could be emotional, approachable, and beautiful. The marketing echoed this, launching with a simple campaign that directly recalled the introduction of the original Macintosh. Jobs made several bold and controversial bets with the iMac that would define Apple's future approach. He defiantly omitted the floppy disk drive, declaring it a relic of the past, and instead made the USB the primary port, a move that forced the entire peripheral industry to adapt and cemented USB as the new standard. He positioned the iMac not as a complex machine for techies, but as a simple consumer internet appliance, a gateway to the web for everyday people. The iMac's success was the shot heard round the world, selling nearly 800,000 units in its first 5 months, pulling Apple back from the brink of bankruptcy and announcing that the company, under its returned leader, was once again a powerful creative force. 28. CEO, still crazy after all these years. In January 2000, Jobs formally became Apple CEO. This was accompanied by a monumental stock options grant from the board, a move that would ultimately tie his personal fortune directly to the company's spectacular resurgence, yielding billions to his wealth. Jobs' core management style remained intensely demanding and passionately focused. He continued his legendary top 100 retreats, gathering the company's most crucial executives in secret for intense strategy sessions and team bonding. His most significant and disciplined strategic move was a ruthless focus on simplification. He drastically slashed the sprawling and confusing product lines to concentrate all of Apple's talent and resources on a mere handful of core products that he believed could be insanely great. 29. Apple Stores, Genius Bars, and Sienna Sandstone. Steve Jobs believed Apple needed to control its retail environment to properly showcase its products. He moved beyond a discarded four-quadrants model to create stores as community town squares. A key innovation was the Genius Bar, which transformed tech support into an accessible, human service. Jobs obsessed over materials, importing Sienna Sandstone from Italy and designing iconic glass staircases. Operationally, he aimed for minimal backroom inventory through a hyper-efficient supply chain. To perfect the experience, they secretly built a full-sized mock store in a warehouse, refining every detail before launch. This fanatical control and attention to detail redefined technology retail. 30. The Digital Hub, from iTunes to the iPod. Jobs envisioned the personal computer evolving beyond a standalone tool into the central digital hub for a new generation of electronic devices, seamlessly connecting cameras, phones, and eventually, music players. This vision was catalyzed by his personal frustration with existing digital music players, which he found truly awful and unusably complex. Apple's first move was software-based. They acquired a small program called SoundJam and tasked its developers with transforming it into a simple, elegant application for the Mac. This became iTunes. The hardware vision was crystallized in a single, powerful goal: to create a device that could hold 1,000 songs in your pocket and navigating a vast music library effortlessly. Jobs made a critical technological bet by using the high-speed FireWire connection for the iPod, ensuring fast music syncing at a time when USB was still slow. Finally, the iconic white earbuds were a deliberate design choice, creating a visible status symbol that made the iPod and its user instantly recognizable. The iPod was not just a music player. It was the first physical, blockbuster embodiment of the digital hub strategy, a perfectly integrated piece of a larger ecosystem. 31. The iTunes Store, I'm the Pied Piper. Steve Jobs positioned himself as the leader transforming the music industry from piracy into the digital age. He envisioned a legal celestial jukebox. Through personal negotiations with record labels, he secured music licenses, fighting for a simple 99 cents per song model against their push for variable pricing. A key compromise was adding digital rights management to prevent copying. The store's revolutionary success stemmed from its myriad of integrations with the iPod and iTunes software, creating a seamless, closed ecosystem from purchase to playback. It temporarily saved the industry and changed music consumption. 32. The iPod, the man who walked alone. The iPod's massive success solidified Steve Jobs' image as a solitary visionary and made the white earbuds a cultural symbol. A key partnership with U2 and Bono, who described Jobs as crackling with energy, resulted in a special edition iPod and merged music and tech. The device fulfilled its 1,000 songs in your pocket promise so completely that it became a dominant fashion accessory, capturing over 70% of the market. 33. The Music Man, the soundtrack of his. Music was the essential soundtrack to Steve Jobs' life, deeply influencing his identity. He had a lifelong obsession with Bob Dylan, whose rebellious persona he identified with, and great reverence for the Beatles, despite legal battles over the Apple name. This appreciation directly inspired the Think Different campaign. His brief relationship with folk singer Joan Baez further connected him to this world. These musical influences were integral to his philosophy, reflected in his Stanford speech about connecting dots looking backward. They shaped his aesthetic and his belief in rebellious individuals changing the world. 34. Pixar's Friends and Foes. At Pixar, Steve Jobs found a creative sanctuary and formed two of his most successful and respectful partnerships. one with creative genius John Lasseter and the other with the calm, technical master Ed Catmull. Together, they formed a powerful triumvirate. However, this period was also defined by a protracted and bitter feud with the Walt Disney Company, personified by its CEO, Michael Eisner. Jobs saw himself and the Pixar team as the true creatives, fighting against the Disney suits who he believed were stifling artistry and trying to claim an unfair share of the profits from Pixar's hit films. This conflict played out during the difficult production of Cars and in intense distribution negotiations. Jobs' philosophy to avoid hiring mediocre people and to build an A-team found a perfect home at Pixar. He deeply admired the company's culture of creativity, exemplified by initiatives like Pixar University, which fostered continuous learning. Pixar represented a side of Jobs that was often hidden at Apple, a leader who could be part of a collaborative, creative team, fiercely protecting his artists from corporate interference. 35. 21st Century Macs, setting Apple apart. Jobs executed bold moves to keep the Mac relevant. He transitioned the entire line from PowerPC to Intel chips, a huge deal that let Mac first match, then surpass Windows PC performance. The era produced the powerful MacBook Pro and the iconic MacBook Air. Its radical thinness required the controversial removal of the CD/DVD drive, showcasing his willingness to abandon legacy technology to define the future. 36. Round 1. The cancer is staged. In 2003, Steve Jobs was diagnosed with a rare, treatable pancreatic tumor. Initially considering himself lucky, he resisted surgery for 9 months, pursuing alternative medicine like acupuncture and special diets. This delay worried those close to him. He eventually underwent major surgery in 2004. This confrontation with mortality directly inspired his iconic 2005 Stanford commencement speech, where he shared some of his stories and the mantra, "Stay hungry, stay foolish," rooted in the hard-won truth that death is the destination we all share. 37. The iPhone, 3 revolutionary products in one. The iPhone's creation was a masterclass in secrecy and relentless innovation, known internally as Project Purple. Jobs introduced it with the iconic pitch, 3 devices in one, a widescreen iPod, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communicator. From the outset, he rejected the industry-standard stylus, declaring, "We're going to use our fingers." This mandate drove the development of groundbreaking multi-touch gestures like pinch to zoom and smooth inertial scrolling. A major crisis emerged just weeks before launch when Jobs realized the plastic screen would scratch easily in a pocket. He demanded an unscratchable glass screen, leading to a frantic but successful partnership with Corning to develop Gorilla Glass in an impossibly short time frame. The iPhone was more than a product. It was a declaration that computers could be intimate, intuitive, and carried in your pocket, forever changing our relationship with technology. 38. Round 2. The cancer recurs. By 2008, Steve Jobs' declining health became visibly apparent through significant weight loss, sparking widespread public concern. Apple initially issued a misleading statement, attributing his condition to a common bug and a hormonal imbalance. This was a deliberate downplaying of the truth. His cancer had returned and was metastasizing. The situation became critical, leading to a secret liver transplant in 2009. The transplant was conducted under a veil of extreme secrecy, including the use of a false name to protect his privacy. Before the high-risk surgery, he wrote a simple, determined note to his doctor at Stanford, "I'll be back." This period marked the beginning of a series of necessary medical leaves of absence from Apple, which he announced with great reluctance. Throughout this ordeal, Jobs approached his illness as he did everything in his life. He became an expert patient, constantly researching, questioning, and pushing his doctors, trying to maintain control over a situation that was fundamentally uncontrollable. 39. The iPad. Into the post-PC era. Jobs introduced the iPad as a magical and revolutionary device that would lead the post-PC era. He positioned it as a third category, a Goldilocks solution between a phone and a laptop. Anticipating and aggressively countering the just a big iPhone critique, he argued its larger screen created a fundamentally different experience. He envisioned it transforming book and newspaper publishing. Jobs believed so deeply in its significance that he called it the most important thing I've ever done. He maintained his finger-based interaction philosophy, rejecting stylus input. The iPad embodied his belief that technology should be so intuitive it feels like magic. 40. New battles and echoes of old ones. Even as his health declined, Jobs found himself embroiled in major public battles that tested his leadership and principles. The most prominent was AntennaGate, a crisis surrounding the iPhone 4, whose external antenna design could cause signal loss when held in a specific way. Jobs' initial response was defiant and controversial, telling users you're holding it wrong. He eventually offered free cases to solve the issue, while simultaneously defending the phone's performance. Around the same time, he waged a public war against Adobe Flash, refusing to allow the ubiquitous web plugin on iOS devices. He published a letter, arguing it was a buggy, battery-hogging, closed system that belonged to the past. He saw its rejection as a stand for open web standards. Finally, his rivalry with Google intensified as Android gained market share. Jobs viewed Android as a stolen product, a direct rip-off of the iPhone's revolutionary ideas, and he vowed to wage thermonuclear war to destroy it, seeing it as a profound betrayal. 41. To infinity, the cloud, the spaceship, and beyond. In his final years, Steve Jobs was intensely focused on Apple's future beyond his lifetime. He poured his energy into two monumental projects. The first was a new, futuristic corporate campus, a massive, ring-shaped building he envisioned as a spaceship that would foster collaboration and stand as an architectural testament to Apple's values. The second was iCloud, a strategic shift to replace the old model of syncing devices by tethering them to a computer. He saw the cloud as the natural evolution of his original digital hub strategy, and he obsessed over making iCloud so seamless that it just works automatically syncing content across all Apple devices. Both the Spaceship Campus and iCloud were designed to reinforce his post-PC vision, where the computer was no longer the central device. These projects represented his final efforts to architect Apple's future. 42. Round 3. The Twilight Struggle. The year 2011 marked Steve Jobs' final, painful decline. His physical deterioration became increasingly visible, a stark contrast to the vibrant products Apple continued to launch. He made his last public appearance at the iPad 2 event in March, a gaunt figure who still mustered his characteristic showmanship. As his condition worsened, the challenge became managing intense pain while preserving his mental clarity for final decisions and goodbyes. He exhibited a philosophical acceptance of his fate, telling his biographer, "I've had a good run." He then began the poignant process of saying individual, heartfelt goodbyes to his closest friends, longtime colleagues, and his family. His final days were spent at his home in Palo Alto, surrounded by loved ones. According to his sister, Mona Simpson, his last words were spoken as he looked at his family, then passed them, and said, "Oh wow," 3 times, a final, enigmatic expression of wonder at the journey's end. 43. Legacy, the brightest heaven of invention. Jobs' most enduring principle was a belief in end-to-end control, the insistence on integrating hardware, software, and services into a seamless, beautiful, and intuitive whole. His life was the ultimate embodiment of his own philosophy that you can only connect the dots looking backward, and his diverse experiences from calligraphy to counterculture connected to forge a unique creative vision. He achieved his youthful goal to put a dent in the universe, not just by building successful companies, but by fundamentally altering multiple industries and how people interact with technology. His genius lay in his position at the intersection of the arts and technology, believing this was where true innovation occurred. His powerful will to ignore the impossible was not a flaw, but an essential engine of his achievements. Ultimately, his greatest skill was his ability to master complexity and present it with breathtaking simplicity, making advanced technology feel magical and accessible. His legacy is not merely a collection of products, but a testament to the power of passion, intuition, and the relentless pursuit of a connected vision. Thank you for listening to this audiobook. Your interaction matters, so don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.